Chapter 1. The Veiled Offering. The carriage wheels groaned against cobblestone as Alara pressed her gloved fingers to the frosted window, watching the last lights of her world disappear into fog. She had not expected her wedding day to feel like a funeral procession, yet here she was wrapped in black lace and silence, being delivered to a man she'd never seen, a monster, the servants whispered. A king of shadows. She had stopped correcting them weeks ago. The veil covering her face was thick enough to obscure her features completely, sewn with mourning silk that brushed her collarbones with every shallow breath. It had been her stepmother's final cruelty. Let him think he's married a ruined thing. Let him regret taking you sight unseen. Alara's fingers trembled against the glass. The marriage contract had been signed in her late father's name. A political arrangement made before his death, before her stepmother's poison had worked its way through the estate, turning Alara from beloved daughter to scorned burden. The agreement had been ironclad. One human bride in exchange for the Nightburn houses. Protection over her family's dwindling. Lands. No one had asked if she consented. No one ever did. The carriage lurched to a stop before iron gates that seemed to scrape the belly of the storm clouds. Beyond them, Blackthorn Manor rose like a monument to forgotten grief, all spires and shattered gargoyles, windows dark as closed eyes. Miss? The driver's voice cracked. We've arrived. Alara gathered her skirts, the fabric heavy as armor, and stepped into the rain. The gates opened without a sound. She had taken only 3 steps up the obsidian staircase when the doors swung inward, revealing a vast entrance hall lit by candles that burned without flickering. The air smelled of old stone and something sweeter, night blooming flowers, perhaps, or funeral incense. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the hall. He moved like smoke given form, his footsteps utterly silent against marble. He wore black from throat to boot, his coat embroidered with silver thread that caught the candlelight like spider silk. His face was a study in contradictions, beautiful in the way winter is beautiful, all sharp edges and pale perfection, with eyes the color of tarnished silver. When he looked at her, Alara felt the weight of centuries in his gaze. You came alone. His voice was low, measured with an accent she couldn't place. Not quite English, not quite anything mortal. I had no choice. The words escaped before she could soften them. Something flickered across his features, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. He descended the remaining stairs with preternatural grace, stopping just outside the radius of her candlelight. I am Lucian Ashford, Lord of the Nightburn House and King of the Northern Territories. He inclined his head with aristocratic precision. You are Alara Thornwood, my contracted bride. Not betrothed. Not beloved, contracted. I am, she said quietly. He circled her slowly, studying her veiled form with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She forced herself to stand still, to breathe evenly, though her pulse hammered against her ribs. The veil is traditional? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. A suggestion from my family? Her voice remained steady despite the lie. To preserve modesty until the ceremony, modesty. He repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. How quaint. Alara's hands curled into her skirts. She had been warned he would be cruel, dismissive, perhaps violently angry when he discovered what manner of bride had been sent to him. Her stepmother had made certain she understood exactly how repulsive she'd been made to appear. The heavy veil, the mourning clothes, the letter sent ahead describing her as adequately formed but unremarkable in feature and temperament. Let him think he's been cheated, her stepmother had said with a smile. Let him remember the insult. The ceremony will take place at midnight, Lucian continued, turning away from her. You will be shown to your chambers. A bath has been prepared. Refreshments, if you require them. And if I refuse? The question slipped out unbidden. He paused mid-step, his shoulders tensing beneath the expensive fabric. When he turned back, his expression was unreadable. Refuse the bath or the marriage? Both, either. Alara lifted her chin. I signed nothing. My father made this arrangement before his death. Legally, I'm not bound. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then, to her absolute shock, he smiled, a small, humorless curve of his mouth that didn't reach his eyes. You're correct. The contract binds your family's lands to my protection, but you personally made no vow. He took a single step closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. However, if you leave, the agreement is void. The House of Crimson Thorn, our rivals, will claim your territories within a fortnight. Your stepmother and her children will be dead within a month. The human settlements under your father's care will be repurposed. Alara's breath caught. Repurposed? Blood farms. The words fell like stones. Feeding grounds. The Crimson Thorn has no use for protected territories. Only livestock? Horror crawled up her spine. You're telling me I have no choice. I'm telling you the truth. His silver eyes held hers through the veil's shadows. Something I suspect you've had precious little of lately. The accuracy of that statement struck her silent. Lucian gestured toward the stairs where a woman in gray stood waiting human. Alara noted with relief, judging by the warmth of her complexion and the steady rhythm of her breathing. Mrs. Harrow will attend you. We have 4 hours until midnight. I suggest you use them to decide whether you prefer a monster's protection or your enemy's mercy. He turned and walked away, his coat billowing like raven's wings. Alara stood trembling in the candlelit hall, rain still dripping from her hem, her future hanging by threads she couldn't see. Behind her veil, tears gathered and fell. She had come here expecting cruelty, dismissal, perhaps violence. She had not expected the truth, and she certainly hadn't expected the way. Her pulse had quickened when he'd stepped close, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. Recognition. Chapter 2. Beneath the Veil, Mrs. Harrow moved through the corridors with practiced efficiency, her candle casting trembling shadows against walls hung with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow their passage. Alara kept pace behind her, acutely aware of how her wet shoes squeaked against polished floors that had likely never known such indignity. The East Wing is yours, Miss, Mrs. Harris said over her shoulder, her voice carrying the crisp efficiency of long service. His lordship occupies the West. The central halls are common spaces, the library, the conservatory, the dining room, though. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Though his lordship rarely dines in the traditional sense. Because he's a vampire. Alara said it flatly. Testing the word in her mouth, Mrs. Harrow's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't break stride. Because he keeps irregular hours, miss. As do all the Nightburn. They climbed a spiral staircase that seemed to wind upward forever, until Mrs. Harrow finally pushed open a heavy oak door, revealing chambers that stole Alara's breath. The room was enormous, dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in midnight blue velvet. A fire crackled in a marble hearth large enough to stand in. Candles burned in silver candelabras, and through the tall windows, Alara could see nothing but darkness and rain. A copper bathtub sat before the fire, steam rising from its surface in lazy curls. Your things were brought up earlier, Mrs. Harrow said. Gesturing to a trunk Alara didn't recognize, certainly not the battered case she'd brought from home. His lordship had a wardrobe prepared when he received word of the marriage. He was quite specific about the selections. Alara's stomach twisted. He chose my clothes. The fabrics and colors, miss. I handled the actual fittings based on the measurements provided. Mrs. Harrow's expression softened slightly. He has excellent taste, if I may say so. Nothing improper, all quite elegant. How thoughtful, Alara murmured, unable to keep the edge from her voice. A well-dressed prisoner. Mrs. Harrow said nothing, but something in her eyes suggested understanding. She moved to the bathtub, testing the water with practiced fingers. I'll help you undress, miss, and then leave you to bathe in privacy. Ring the bell when you're ready to dress for the ceremony. Alara's hands went instinctively to her veil. I can manage myself, thank you. The gown's fastenings are quite complex. I can manage. Firmer this time. Mrs. Harrow studied her for a long moment, then nodded and withdrew, closing the door with a soft click. Alone at last, Alara sagged against the bedpost, her legs threatening to give out. She had maintained her composure through the entire journey, through the terror of those iron gates and Lucien's unsettling presence. But now, in the silence of this beautiful cage, the weight of it all crashed down. She was going to marry a vampire in 4 hours, a king of monsters who spoke of blood farms and protected territories as casually as others discussed the weather. Man, if he could still be called that, who had given her the truth when lies would have been kinder. Her fingers found the veil's fastening at the nape of her neck. The heavy fabric fell away, and she caught her reflection in the mirror above the vanity. The face staring back was not the ugly duckling her stepmother had promised to send. Alara's features were delicate rather than bold high cheekbones, a soft mouth, large eyes the color of storm clouds. Her dark hair tumbled past her shoulders in waves that had been ruthlessly contained in tight braids for months. Her stepmother had forbidden her from arranging it prettily, had insisted on severe styles that pulled at her scalp and gave her headaches. Let him think you plain, her stepmother had hissed while fastening the veil. Let him know what disappointment tastes like. But Alara wasn't plain. She was exhausted, grief-stricken, and terrified. But she wasn't the hideous creature that letter had described, which meant Lucien was expecting someone else entirely. She should have felt triumphant her stepmother's cruelty would backfire. Spectacular when the veil came off during the ceremony. But instead, anxiety coiled tighter in her chest. What if he thought she'd deceived him? What if he saw her face and felt, what? Anger? Suspicion? What if he looked at her the way her stepmother had, as something to be used and discarded? Alara undressed mechanically, her fingers clumsy with cold and nerves. The bath was perfectly heated, scented with lavender and something else, rosemary, perhaps. She sank into it and let the warmth seep into her bones. She had not been warm in months. Her stepmother had moved her to the coldest room in the estate after her father's death, had reduced her staff to nothing, had ensured every day was a small, deliberate cruelty. Alara had endured it because she'd had nowhere else to go. No family to appeal to, no fortune of her own. And now she was here, in a vampire's castle, about to be bound to a man who drank blood and commanded the night. Yet she had been warmer in his presence, in this room, in the last hour than she had been in 6 months under her stepmother's roof. The realization unsettled her more than anything else. She stayed in the bath until the water cooled, then dried herself and approached the wardrobe Mrs. Harrow had mentioned. Inside hung gowns in rich jewel tones, sapphire, emerald, deep burgundy. The fabrics were exquisite, silk, velvet, lace so fine it seemed woven from moonlight. At the very front hung a gown of white silk with silver embroidery along the bodice and sleeves. The wedding dress. It was beautiful. It was also several sizes too large, clearly made for someone more generously proportioned than Alara's slender frame. He had ordered it based on her stepmother's false descriptions. The measurements would be wrong, the style chosen for someone completely different. Alara's hands trembled as she touched the silk. In a few hours, she would stand before him and the veil would lift, and he would see that his bride was nothing like what he'd been promised. She should tell him now. Warn him. Give him the chance to void the contract before the ceremony made it permanent. But if she did, those territories would fall. Those people would become feeding grounds. Her choice, it seemed, had been made the moment she'd stepped through those gates. Alara rang the bell. Mrs. Harrow appeared within moments, her expression carefully neutral as she helped Alara into undergarments and then approached the wedding gown. It's too large, Alara said quietly. Yes, Miss. Mrs. Harrow's fingers worked quickly, pinning and adjusting with expert precision. "We'll make it work." 20 minutes later, Alara stood before the mirror in a gown that had been transformed by clever pinning into something that almost fit. The veil went back on last, heavy and concealing. "You look lovely, miss," Mrs. Harris said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "He won't think so," Alara whispered. "He's expecting someone else." Mrs. Harrow's reflection met hers in the mirror. "His lordship is many things, miss. But in all my years here, I've never known him to be a fool." Before Alara could ask what she meant, a clock somewhere in the manor began to chime that midnight approached. Her wedding hour had come. Chapter 3. The Midnight Valve. Chapel was older than the manor itself, built into the foundation like a secret the earth had kept for centuries. Alara descended stone steps worn smooth by countless feet, her hand gripping the iron railing as Mrs. Harrow's candle led the way. The air grew colder with each step, carrying the scent of ancient incense and something metallic that made her teeth ache. Blood, she realized. Old blood, soaked in the stone. The chapel opened before them, a circular room with a domed ceiling painted and faded, frescoes of stars and strange symbols. 7 columns ringed the space, each carved with names and languages Alara didn't recognize. At the center stood a raised dais of black marble, and upon it, 2 figures waited. Lucian stood beside a man in ecclesiastical robes so dark they seemed to absorb light. The priest, if that's what he was, had skin like parchment and eyes that reflected the candlelight with an amber gleam. Not human. "Miss Thornwood," the priest said, his voice like wind through empty halls. "I am Father Mikhail, keeper of the Blood Covenant. Welcome to the House of Nightburn." Alara forced herself to walk forward, each step echoing in the vast silence. Lucian watched her approach with an expression she couldn't read, his face a perfect mask of aristocratic composure. He had changed clothes. Now he wore a coat of deepest black velvet over a silver brocade waistcoat, his cravat pinned with a rupee that gleamed like a drop of fresh blood. His pale hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp angles of his face and the inhuman perfection of his features. He was beautiful. The way a blade is beautiful, elegant, and deadly. "You came," he said as she reached the dais. "Did you doubt I would?" Alara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I thought you might choose the window." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "It's a 3-story drop, but survivable for someone determined enough." Despite everything, Alara almost smiled. "I considered it, and yet here you stand." His silver eyes studied her veiled form. "Brave or desperate, I wonder? Does it matter?" "Perhaps not." He offered his hand, palm up, a question, not a demand. "Shall we begin?" Alara placed her gloved hand in his. Even through the fabric, his touch was cool, his grip firm but careful, as though he feared breaking her. Father Mikhail opened a book bound in leather that looked disturbingly like skin. The pages within were illuminated in silver and red ink, the text written in that same strange script from the columns. "The Blood Covenant is older than kingdoms," the priest intoned. "Older than the division between day and night. It binds mortal to immortal, life to unlife, blood to blood. Those who enter this bond do so with full knowledge of its permanence." He fixed Alara with those amber eyes. "Once sealed, it cannot be broken except by true death. Do you understand, child?" "I understand," her voice echoed in the chapel. "And do you enter this covenant willingly, without coercion or false promise?" Alara's throat tightened. This was her chance, her last chance to speak the truth. To tell them about the deception, the false measurements, the stepmother's cruel manipulations. Lucian's hand remained steady in hers, his thumb resting against her racing pulse. "I enter willingly," she heard herself say. Father Mikhail turned to Lucian. "And you, Lord of Nightburn, King of the Northern Territories, do you accept this mortal woman as your bound companion, to protect and provide for until death claims one or both?" "I do," no hesitation. His eyes never left her veiled face. "Then speak the words of binding." Lucien's other hand rose, hovering near her veil. The old laws require I see your face before the bond is sealed. May I? Alara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. This was it, the moment her stepmother had orchestrated. The great revelation that would prove the Thornwoods had sent damaged goods. She nodded, not trusting her voice. His fingers found the veil's edge with surprising gentleness. He lifted it slowly, the heavy fabric sliding back like a curtain being drawn. Candlelight touched her face. Lucien went absolutely still. For 3 heartbeats, he simply stared, his expression unreadable. Then something shifted in his features, surprise giving way to something darker, more complex. You, he said softly, and there was wonder in his voice and confusion, and beneath it all, something that might have been recognition. You're not what you expected, Alara finished, her chin lifting defensively. The letter described someone else. The measurements were wrong. I should have told you before, but you're beautiful. The words fell between them like stones into still water. Elara blinked. What? The letter described a plain, unremarkable woman with coarse features and a timid disposition. His thumb traced her jawline, barely touching, his expression almost bewildered. You are none of those things. I don't understand. Alara's thoughts raced. You're not angry? Angry? A sharp laugh escaped him. I'm wondering what manner of fool wrote that letter, and what they hoped to gain by lying. My stepmother, Alara whispered. She wanted you to feel cheated, to regret the arrangement. Understanding flashed across his face, followed by something that looked almost like fury, but not directed at her. Your stepmother is a short-sighted idiot, he said flatly. Father Mikhail continued the ceremony. The priest's amber eyes gleamed with what might have been amusement. As you wish. Join hands, both of you. Alara placed her other hand in Lucien's. His skin was cool but not cold, his grip careful. Repeat after me, Father Mikhail commanded. I offer my protection for your trust. I offer my protection for your trust, Lucien said. His voice steady. I offer my trust for your protection, Alara echoed. The words feeling heavier than they should. Blood calls to blood, the priest continued. They repeated it together, their voices blending in the ancient chapel. Life bends to death. Life bends to death. Death remembers life. Death remembers life. Father Mikhail produced a silver knife from within his robes, its blade engraved with more of those strange symbols. The bond requires blood freely given. A single drop from each, mingled on sacred ground. Alara's breath caught as Lucien offered his palm to the blade. The knife sliced cleanly, and dark blood, nearly black in the candlelight, welled up. Then the priest turned to her. She extended her hand, forcing it not to shake. The blade stung as it cut, and her blood rose red and bright against her pale skin. Lucien caught her hand in his, their cut palms pressing together. Where their blood met, warmth flared, not painful, but intense, like touching something alive. The covenant is sealed, Father Mikhail pronounced. Mortal and immortal, bound by blood and choice. What is joined here cannot be sundered. The warmth between their palms intensified, then faded. When Lucien released her hand, the cut had already closed, leaving only a thin silver scar. It's done, he said quietly, his eyes still on her face. You are Lady Ashford now, my wife, my responsibility. And you're my husband, Alara replied, testing the word. My protector. Your protector, he agreed. Then softer, your mystery. Before she could ask what he meant, he stepped back, putting distance between them with visible effort. You must be exhausted. Mrs. Harrow will show you back to your chambers. We'll speak tomorrow evening about the household arrangements, and he paused. And what comes next? You're leaving? The question escaped before Alara could stop it. His smile was sad. Dawn approaches, and I have preparations to make. Sleep, Alara. You're safe now. He turned and walked away, his footsteps silent, leaving her standing in the ancient chapel with a silver scar on her palm and a husband who looked at her like she was a puzzle he desperately needed to solve. Chapter 4. The wounded immortal Lara woke to darkness and silence so complete she thought for a moment she'd gone deaf. Then she heard it, the whisper of rain against windows, the distant groan of old wood settling and beneath it all, a sound that didn't belong. Breathing, labored and wet, she sat up, heart pounding, and fumbled for the candle Mrs. Harrow had left on the bedside table. The match scraped, flared, and golden light pushed back the shadows. Her chambers were empty, but the sound continued. Coming from beyond her door, Alara pulled on the robe that had been laid out dark green velvet that pulled at her feet and took the candle. Every instinct screamed at her to stay in her room, to call for Mrs. Harrow, to let someone else investigate, but that breathing was getting weaker. She opened the door. The corridor stretched empty in both directions, but a trail of something dark stained the floor leading toward the west wing. Toward Lucien's chambers. Blood. Elor followed it, her bare feet silent on cold stone. The trail grew heavier, the droplets becoming smears, as though someone had dragged themselves forward despite injury. Lucien's door stood ajar. She pushed it open. The room beyond was chaos. Furniture overturned, curtains shredded, and in the center of it all, collapsed against the side of an enormous bed, was her husband. His coat was torn open, his white shirt soaked through with blood so dark it looked black. His face was ashen, his silver eyes glassy with pain. When he saw her, something like horror crossed his features. "Get out," he rasped. "Not safe." Instead, Alara set down the candle and knelt beside him. Up close, she could see the wound, 3 deep gashes across his chest, still bleeding despite the fact that he'd clearly tried to bandage them. What happened? Her hands hovered over the injury, uncertain. Crimson thorn. He coughed and blood flecked his lips. Ambush. Thought they'd wait. Was wrong. You need a doctor. No doctor. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. Can't let them know how bad it is. Show weakness now, they'll attack the manor. Then what do I do? Alara demanded, fear sharpening her voice. Let you bleed out on your bedroom floor? Won't die. His laugh was bitter. Takes more than this. But need. Time to heal. Day sleep helps, but... He gestured weakly at the windows where the curtains hung in tatters. Can't stay here. Dawn coming. Light will ... Burn you, Alara finished. She'd read the stories sunlight was death to vampires. She looked around the destroyed room, thinking quickly. My chambers. The curtains are intact, and no one would think to look for you there. Can't. He was fading, she could see it. Dangerous. When we're wounded, instincts take over. Might hurt you. You won't. Alara didn't know where the certainty came from, but it settled in her bones like truth. She stood, surveying him critically. He was tall and solid with muscle. Despite his lean frame, she couldn't carry him. But perhaps... Can you walk if I help? Alara, can you? He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once. She got her shoulder under his arm, bracing herself against his weight. He was heavier than he looked, and cold, so cold it shocked her even through the layers of fabric. Together, they stumbled into the corridor. Every step was agony for him, she could tell, though he made no sound beyond ragged breathing. They left a trail of blood behind them, and Alara prayed no servants would wake early. Her chambers seemed impossibly far away. Almost there, she murmured, more to herself than him. Just a little further. His weight increased as his strength failed. By the time they reached her door, he was barely conscious, his head lolling against her shoulder. She half-dragged him to the bed and let him collapse onto it. Blood immediately began soaking into the blue velvet coverlet, but Alara didn't care. She rushed to the windows, checking every curtain, making sure no gap existed where sunlight might penetrate. When she turned back, Lucien had pulled himself partially upright, his back against the headboard. His eyes tracked her movements with predatory focus. Thirsty, he said, and his voice had changed deeper, rougher. So thirsty. Alara's pulse jumped. When did you last feed? 3 days. His hands clenched in the ruined fabric of his shirt, waiting for proper arrangements. Didn't want to frighten you, but you need blood to heal. Yes. The word came out strained. Should call Mrs. Harrow, she knows. Willing donors in the village. But can't. Can't let anyone know I'm wounded. Alara looked at the windows where the faintest gray light was beginning to show around the curtain edges. Dawn was perhaps 20 minutes away. There was no time to send for anyone, and the blood covenant they'd sworn hadn't. Father Mikhail said something about blood calling to blood. She sat on the edge of the bed. Take mine. His eyes went wide. No, you need it. I'm offering it. Isn't that how your laws work? Consent? You don't understand what you're offering? He was shaking now, whether from blood loss or restraint, she couldn't tell. First feeding from a bonded partner creates a connection. You'd feel everything I feel. I'd taste your memories, your emotions. It's intimate in ways you can't imagine. More intimate than marriage? Alara asked quietly. He had no answer for that dot. She held out her wrist, the one with the silver scar from their ceremony. I'm choosing this. My blood, freely given. Take it, Alara. Take it before you're too weak to stop the bleeding after. That practical argument seemed to break through his resistance. With visible reluctance, he took her wrist in both hands. His fingers trembled as they positioned her arm. Tell me if it's too much, he whispered. I'll try to stop. Then his lips touched her skin, and the world transformed. The bite was sharp 2 points of pressure and heat. But the pain faded almost immediately, replaced by a sensation she had no words for. Warmth flooded through her, followed by something that felt like falling and flying simultaneously. She could feel him, truly feel him. His desperation. His fear, not of dying, but of losing control and hurting her. His wonder that she was here, helping him, offering herself, and underneath it all, a loneliness so deep and old, it made her chest ache. How long had he been alone? His grip on her wrist tightened as he drank, and Alara felt her strength beginning to ebb. But she also felt his wounds closing, his pain receding, his cold body warming with her blood. Worth it, she thought hazily. This was worth it. Just as darkness began creeping into the edges of her vision, he pulled away with a gasp. Enough, he said hoarsely, and his thumb pressed against the bite marks. They sealed under his touch, leaving only 2 small scars that matched the one from the ceremony. He looked healthier, already color returning to his face. The wound on his chest reduced to angry red lines. You gave too much, he said, pulling her gently to lie beside him. You need to rest. Alara's eyelids were already closing. You're welcome. The last thing she felt before sleep claimed her was his hand carefully stroking her hair, and his voice, barely a whisper. What are you doing to me? Chapter 5. Questions in the dark. Alara awoke to find herself alone in the bed, weak as a newborn kitten and desperately thirsty. The curtains remained drawn, creating a twilight gloom that suggested evening had arrived. On the bedside table sat a covered tray. She struggled upright, her head swimming, and lifted the silver dome to reveal bread, cheese, sliced fruit, and a pitcher of what smelled like honeyed wine. A note lay beside the plate in elegant script. Eat, drink. You need to recover your strength. I'll return after full dark. While her fingers traced the letter as fragmented memories surfaced. The blood. The feeding. The overwhelming intimacy of feeling his emotions tangled with hers. She touched her wrists where twin scars now marked her skin. Remembering the moment his walls had crumbled and she'd felt the truth of him. Centuries of isolation wrapped around a core of carefully controlled longing. He had been so alone. Alara forced herself to eat, though her stomach rebelled at first. The wine helped, sweet and fortifying. By the time she'd finished, strength had begun seeping back into her limbs. She rose on unsteady legs and moved to the window, peeking through a gap in the curtains. Full night had fallen, the ground shrouded in darkness, broken only by scattered torchlight along the garden paths. A knock sounded at the door. Come in, she called. Expecting Mrs. Harrow. Instead, Lucien entered, closing the door quietly behind him. He'd changed into fresh clothes, dark trousers, and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. revealing forearms marked with scars she hadn't noticed before. His hair was damp, as though he'd recently bathed. "You're awake." Relief flickered across his features. "How do you feel?" "Weak, dizzy, but alive." She gestured at the empty tray. "Thank you for the food. It's the least I could do after you saved my life." He remained by the door, maintaining careful distance. "I owe you an explanation. Several, I think." Alara lowered herself into the chair by the fireplace, not trusting her legs. "Starting with why the Crimson Thorn tried to kill you the night of our wedding." Lucien's jaw tightened. They didn't know it was our wedding night. The ceremony was deliberately kept private only. Father Mikhail and Mrs. Harrow knew the exact timing. The attack was meant to happen before the bond was sealed. "Why does our marriage matter to them?" "Because it legitimizes my claim to your family's territories under both vampire and human law." He began to pace, restless energy contained in controlled movements. "The Crimson Thorn has been trying to acquire those lands for decades. Your father refused every offer. When he died and your stepmother took control, they thought they'd finally succeed. But then the marriage contract surfaced," Alara said slowly, understanding dawning. "Exactly. A legal agreement signed before your father's death, binding the Thornwood lands to Nightburn protection through marriage. Your stepmother couldn't void it without losing everything, this state, her position, her children's inheritance. So she sent me instead of breaking the contract." Bitterness crept into Alara's voice. "Let me be your problem while she kept the estate." She made a grave miscalculation. Lucien stopped pacing, his silver eyes intense. "She thought I'd be so displeased with the bride she described that I'd find a way to void the contract myself. Instead you got me." Alara met his gaze. "And now the Crimson Thorn knows they've lost the territories unless they kill you before the marriage becomes common knowledge. You learn quickly. I had a good teacher. My father prepared me to manage the estate someday, before—" She swallowed hard. "Before his heart gave out? Or so the physicians claimed." Lucien went very still. "You doubt that diagnosis?" It wasn't a question. Alara realized he could probably sense her emotions now after the feeding. The bond worked both ways. My father was healthy, strong. He went to bed complaining of indigestion and never woke up. She twisted her hands in her lap. My stepmother remarried within 6 months. She seemed more relieved than grieved. "Do you think she poisoned him?" The blunt question hung in the air between them. Alara had never said it aloud before, never dared give voice to the suspicion that had haunted her. "I think it's possible," she whispered. "I think many things are possible that I once dismissed as paranoia." Lucien crossed the room and knelt before her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. "I will look into your father's death, quietly. If your stepmother had him killed, she'd answer for it. Why?" The question escaped before Alara could stop it. "Why do you care? This marriage was a political arrangement. You don't know me. You offered me your blood when I was dying." His hand covered hers where it gripped the chair arm. "You could have let me burn in the sunlight. Could have let the Crimson Thorn's assassin finish the job. Instead, you risked yourself to save me. The contract required you to marry me, not to care whether I lived or died afterward." His thumb traced the scars on her wrist. "You chose to help me. That matters." Alara's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. "You felt it too then?" "During the feeding. The connection, yes." The word came out rough. "I felt your grief. Your loneliness. How badly you've been hurt by people who should have protected you." His eyes searched hers. "I felt your strength, Alara, your refusal to break despite everything they did to you." Heat crept into her cheeks. "It's invasive, isn't it? That kind of intimacy without permission. It requires consent to initiate. You offered your blood freely. But yes, the depth of connection can be overwhelming." He released her hand and stood, putting distance between them again. "It will fade somewhat over the next few days, though a permanent bond remains between us now." "What kind of bond?" "I'll always be able to sense if you're in danger. You'll be able to call me, and I'll come." He moved to the window, his profile sharp against the dark curtains. "It's a protective measure, written into the blood covenant. Mortal partners of vampires need safeguards." "And what do vampires need?" The question seemed to surprise him. He turned, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He paused, choosing words carefully. "We need something to tether us to the world. Immortality without purpose becomes a curse." Partners, true partners, not captives, give us reason to remain engaged rather than retreating into isolation. Is that what you did? Before this arrangement? Yes, simple honesty. I've been alone for a very long time, Alara. So long I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone choose to stand beside me. The vulnerability in his admission made her chest ache. She rose, crossing to stand beside him at the window. I'm standing here now, she said quietly. Not because a contract demands it. Because I choose to. His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining. Cool skin against warm scars, touching scars. Then we face what comes next together. Chapter 6. The Ancient Laws. 3 nights passed in careful orbits around each other. Alara recovered her strength, eating the meals Mrs. Harrow brought and exploring the manor's endless corridors during the day. Lucian emerged only after sunset, always impeccably dressed, always maintaining a respectful distance. They took dinner together in a parlor overlooking the gardens. Though Lucian only drank wine while she ate, they discussed safe topics, books, music, the history of the estate. But the air between them hummed with unspoken questions. On the 4th night, Alara found him in the library. The room was magnificent, 3 stories of books bound in leather and gilt, accessed by spiral staircases and narrow walkways. Lucian sat at a massive oak desk, surrounded by open volumes and scattered papers. You're researching something, she observed from the doorway. He looked up, candlelight catching in his silver eyes. Your father's death. I've been reviewing records from the human physicians who attended him, cross-referencing with known poisons. Alara's throat tightened. And nothing conclusive yet. But there are inconsistencies in the timeline. He gestured to a chair across from him. Sit, there's something else we need to discuss. She settled into the leather chair, tension coiling in her stomach. That sounds ominous. The Crimson Thorn knows about our marriage now. I received a formal challenge this evening. He slid a letter across the desk-heavy parchment sealed with red wax. Alara scanned the knit script. Much of it was in that strange language from the chapel, but certain phrases stood out: breach of territorial rights, unsanctioned bonding, trial by house council. What does this mean? It means they're contesting our marriage through official channels rather than assassination. Lucian leaned back in his chair. In 10 days, we'll face the house council representatives from all the major vampire houses. They'll determine whether our bond is legitimate. How could it not be? We followed all the proper procedures. The challenge claims I coerced you, that you couldn't have given true consent because you didn't understand what you were agreeing to. His expression darkened. They'll argue that as a mortal, you lacked the knowledge to make an informed decision about binding yourself to a vampire. Alara's hands clenched. That's absurd. I knew exactly what I was doing. Did you? He met her eyes steadily. Did you know that our bond means you'll age slower now? That my blood in your system will extend your lifespan, possibly by decades? Did you know that other vampires will be able to sense my claim on you, that it might make you a target? She hadn't known any of that. The revelation settled over her like a weight. You didn't tell me, she said carefully. I should have. Before the ceremony, guilt flickered across his features. But I was desperate to secure the alliance, to protect those territories. I told myself you'd be safer married to me than left to your stepmother's mercy, and that was true. But I also didn't give you all the information you deserved. Alara absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. What else should I know? Lucian rose and moved to the window, his back to her. The bond can be deepened. What we have now is the basic covenant protection and partnership. But there are additional rituals. An exchange of blood under the full moon that would let you hear my thoughts. A ceremony that would make you immune to compulsion from other vampires. And the final ritual? Alara asked, somehow knowing there was more. Conversion. He spoke without turning. The transformation from mortal to vampire. It requires 3 exchanges over 3 nights, with the 3rd ending in death and rebirth. The clinical way he described it sent chills down her spine. Have you ever turned to anyone? No, quiet but firm. I won't lie, I've been tempted over the centuries. But conversion without absolute certainty from both parties is tantamount to murder. You lose the sun, Alara, lose the ability to taste food, to feel warmth. You'd outlive everyone you've ever known, and watch the world change in ways that might break you. You make it sound terrible. It can be. He finally turned to face her. It can also be extraordinary, but it's irreversible, and I refuse to make that choice for anyone else. Alara stood and crossed to him, drawn by the pain underlying his words. Someone made it for you. My sire. 300 years ago. His jaw tightened. I was dying of plague. She turned me without asking, without explaining what I'd become. I woke up immortal and furious. Where is she now? Dead. Killed in the house wars 2 centuries ago. No emotion in his voice, but Alara sensed the complicated grief beneath. We'd reconciled by then, but I never forgave her for stealing my choice. Understanding clicked into place. That's why consent matters so much to you. Yes. He touched her face gently, his cool fingers tracing her cheekbone. Which is why I need you to understand what you're walking into with this council trial. They'll question you separately from me. They'll try to find cracks in our story, evidence that you were forced or manipulated. What happens if they rule against us? The marriage is annulled. The territories revert to contested status. The Crimson Thorn moves in within days. His hand dropped. And you return to your stepmother's household? No, the word came out sharp. I won't go back there. Then we need to be prepared. Lucien moved back to the desk, pulling out more papers. The council will want to know everything, how we met, what we discussed before the ceremony, whether I explained the bond's implications. We barely spoke before the ceremony, Alara pointed out. You gave me 4 hours to decide my entire future, which is exactly what they'll use against us. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. They'll say I rushed you, didn't give you time to truly consider. Alara thought about that night, the terror, the exhaustion, the desperate calculation that had led her to say yes. She thought about standing in this manner, watching Lucien walk away after the ceremony, feeling more confused than she'd ever been, but she also thought about the nights since. The careful conversations, the way he'd looked at her when she'd offered her blood, the loneliness she'd felt in him that mirrored her own. Then we tell them the truth, she said firmly. But that it started as a political arrangement but became something more. That we're choosing each other now, fully informed. Are we? His eyes searched hers. Are you choosing this, Alara? Knowing what it means? She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I'm choosing to stand before that council and defend our bond. I'm choosing to stay in this manner, to learn your world. I'm choosing you, Lucien Ashford, with full knowledge that it's complicated and dangerous and nothing like I imagined my life would be. His hand cupped her face again, thumb brushing her lower lip. You're extraordinary. I'm terrified, she admitted. But I'm also certain. He leaned his forehead against hers, breathing her in. Then we prepare for war. Chapter 7. Blood and Siege. The attack came at dawn. Alara woke to the sound of shattering glass and Mrs. Harrow's scream. She threw on her robe and rushed into the corridor to find smoke billowing from the west wing, Lucien's wing. Fire. Mrs. Harrow stumbled toward her, soot-stained and panicking. They've set the west wing ablaze. His lordship is trapped inside, the sun's already risen. Alara's blood turned to ice. Vampires couldn't escape through sunlit corridors. Lucien was sealed in by flames on one side and deadly daylight on the other. Get water, she commanded, her mind racing. Buckets, anything? And wet blankets, we need to create a dark path. She ran toward the west wing, heat hitting her like a wall as she rounded the corner. The hallway was an inferno, flames licking up tapestries and consuming centuries-old wood. Through the smoke, she could see Lucien's door still closed. Alara, stop. Mrs. Harrow grabbed her arm. You can't go in there. He'll burn. She tore free and grabbed a heavy curtain, yanking it from its rod. She dunked it in a decorative fountain, soaking the fabric until water streamed from it. Wrapping the wet curtain around herself like armor, she plunged into the smoke. The heat was suffocating. She could barely see, barely breathe, but she pushed forward until her hands found his door. Locked from the inside. Lucien. She pounded on the wood. Open the door. No response. Behind her, servants arrived with buckets, dousing the flames nearest the corridor. But the fire spread faster than they could fight it. Fed by old wood and ancient furnishings, Alara slammed her shoulder against the door, once, twice. On the third impact, something gave way, and she tumbled into the room. Lucien lay collapsed near the window, where sunlight streamed through broken glass. Smoke inhalation, she realized vampires didn't need to breathe, but the toxic fumes had weakened him. Burn marks seared his exposed skin where a light had touched him. She dragged the wet curtain over him, creating a sheltered darkness, then looped her arms under his shoulders. He was dead weight, unconscious, and vulnerable in the way only day sleep could make him. I've got you, she gasped, hauling him backward. Just stay with me. The corridor was worse now, flames on all sides. But the servants had created a narrow path, beating back the fire with wet blankets and steady determination. Alara dragged Lucien through the gauntlet, her lungs screaming, her eyes streaming tears. The curtain smoldered but held, keeping the sunlight from his protected form. They made it to the east wing, and she pulled him into her chambers, slamming the door against the smoke. She laid him on the bed and checked his burns, angry red wounds that would heal, given time and darkness. "Mrs. Harrow?" she called. "I need bandages and water." The housekeeper appeared moments later, her face grim. "The fire's contained. We lost most of the west wing, but the rest of the manor is safe." She looked at Lucien's unconscious form. "How is he?" "Alive, but he won't wake until sunset." Alara accepted the supplies and began cleaning the burns with gentle efficiency. This was an attack. They knew the sun would trap him. The Crimson Thorn? Who else? Alara wrapped bandages around his forearm where the skin had blistered. "They're trying to kill him before the council trial. If he's dead, the marriage is void." Mrs. Harrow's expression hardened. "Then we need to be ready for them to try again. Can you send word to Father Mikhail? We need allies." Alara moved to his other arm, her hand steady despite the fear coursing through her. "And postcards at all the entrances. No one comes in or out without my permission. You're giving orders now?" Mrs. Harrow's tone wasn't challenging, merely observing. "I'm Lady Ashford," Alara said quietly. "If they want to destroy this house, they'll have to go through me first." Mrs. Harrow smiled, the first genuine smile Alara had seen from her. "As you wish, my lady." The day passed in tense vigilance. Alara remained at Lucien's bedside, watching his burns slowly heal as his body channeled what remained of her blood through his system. She could feel the bond between them humming with his distress, his body's automatic panic at being burned. She took his hand, letting her presence flow through their connection. "Safe now. You're safe." His fingers twitched in hers, and the panic eased up. By the time sunset painted the sky crimson, his wounds had faded to pink scars. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on her face with confusion. "Alara?" His voice was rough. "What happened?" "The Crimson Thorn tried to burn you alive. I got you out." She helped him sit up. "The West Wing is destroyed, but everyone survived." He stared at her, processing, then noticed his bandaged arms. "You went into the fire?" "During daylight. You needed help. You could have died." Horror crept into his expression. "Alara, if the roof had collapsed, but it didn't." She cupped his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I wasn't going to let you burn, Lucien. Not when I could save you." "Why?" The question came out raw. "Why would you risk yourself for me?" "Because you're my husband," she said simply. "Because when I felt your fear through the bond, it terrified me. Because ... She paused, searching for words. "Because when I imagined you gone, the world felt colder." He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. She could feel his heart silent in his chest. But his emotions thundered through there. Connection, gratitude, wonder, fear that she'd been in danger, and beneath it all, something that felt dangerously like love. "They'll come again," he said against her hair. "The council trial is in 6 days. They'll try to eliminate me before then we don't wait." Alara pulled back to look at him. "We go on the offensive. We gather evidence of their attacks and present it to the council early. That's risky. So is sitting here waiting to die." She stood, resolve hardening. "You said I was extraordinary. Let me prove it." Lucien rose beside her, studying her face in the dying light. Then he smiled, a real smile, sharp and dangerous. "Very well, my lady. Let's show them what happens when they threaten House Knight Burton." He offered his hand. She took it. Together, they began to plan their counterattack. Chapter 8, Night Court. The carriage rolled through fog-shrouded streets toward the heart of the vampire district, a part of the city Alara had never seen, where gaslight never quite penetrated the shadows and humans walked quickly with their eyes. Downcast, Lucien sat across from her, dressed in formal court attire, a black velvet coat with silver embroidery that caught the lamplight. His hair pulled back to reveal the sharp, aristocratic lines of his face. He looked every inch the immortal king. Alara wore a gown he'd selected, deep sapphire silk that made her pale skin luminous and her storm-gray eyes striking. A silver circlet rested in her dark hair, marking her as Lady Ashford. "Nervous?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," she admitted. Tell me again what to expect. The council convenes in the Obsidian Hall. 7 houses, 7 representatives. They'll question us separately about the attack and our marriage. His eyes held hers. They'll try to provoke you, to make you say something that contradicts my testimony. Stay calm. Answer truthfully but briefly. And if they rule against us, then we have bigger problems. His hand found hers across the carriage. But I don't think they will. The evidence we've gathered is damning. Over the past 2 days, they'd compiled witness statements from servants who'd seen the Crimson Thorn's agents near the manor before the fire. Father Mikhail had provided records of similar attacks on other houses. And Lucien's own burned flesh had been preserved as proof vampire wounds healed quickly. But magical fire left traces that could be analyzed. The carriage stopped before an imposing structure of black stone that seemed to absorb light. Obsidian Hall. Lucien helped her down, his hand firm on her waist. Stay close to me. The council grounds are in neutral territory, but the corridors between here and the chamber are not. They walked through towering doors into a vast antechamber lit by floating orbs of cold fire. Vampires in elaborate court dress clustered in groups, their conversations dying as Lucien entered. Alara felt their stares like physical weight. Some looked curious, others hostile. All of them ancient and powerful in ways that made her mortality feel painfully obvious. Lord Ashford. A woman materialized from the shadows, tall and elegant in crimson silk, with black hair coiled like a serpent and eyes like rubies. How unexpected to see you vertical. I heard you'd suffered an unfortunate accident, Lady Morgrave. Lucien's tone could have frozen blood. Still making sport of attempted murder, I see. Attempted murder? Lady Morgrave's laugh was musical and cruel. Surely you don't mean to suggest the Crimson Thorn had anything to do with a simple house fire? Simple house fires don't start in sealed rooms during daylight. Alara spoke before she could stop. Herself dot every eye in the chamber turned to her. Lady Morgrave's gaze raked over Alara with predatory interest. The little mortal speaks. How charming. She circled closer, moving with liquid grace. Tell me, child, did he explain what happens to human wives when their vampire lords grow bored? Morgrave. Lucien's voice carried a warning. What? I'm merely educating the girl. Lady Morgrave stopped directly in front of Alara, so close she could see the unnatural stillness of her chest. No breath, no heartbeat. They age while we remain eternal. They wither and die while we watch. Most lords keep their mortal pets for a decade or 2, then discard them for fresher blood. Alara lifted her chin, refusing to step back. Good thing Lord Ashford isn't most lords. Something flickered in Lady Morgrave's ruby-eyed surprise, perhaps, or respect. Bold. I can see why he kept you. She glanced at Lucien. The council is ready. They're calling you both. The chamber beyond was circular, with 7 thrones arranged in a semicircle. Each throne was carved from a different stone: obsidian, marble, jade, crystal, onyx, ivory, and bloodstone. The vampires seated upon them radiated power that made Alara's skin pale. Center stood Father Mikhail, holding his ancient book. Lord Lucien Ashford of House Nightburn, he intoned. Lady Alara Ashford, his bonded companion. You stand before the Council of 7 to answer challenges brought by House Crimson Thorn. A vampire rose from the bloodstone throne mail, with copper hair and a smile that showed too many teeth. I am Lord Cassius of Crimson Thorn. I challenge the legitimacy of this bond on grounds of coercion, insufficient disclosure, and improper consent. State your evidence, commanded the vampire on the obsidian throne, an ancient woman, whose skin seemed carved from night itself. Lord Cassius gestured, and servants brought forth documents. The marriage was conducted in secret, with no witnesses beyond House Nightborn's own priest. The mortal bride was given less than 4 hours to consider the arrangement. Lord Ashford failed to disclose critical information about the bond's permanent effects. Lady Alara, the ancient woman, said, Did Lord Ashford coerce you into this marriage? No. Alara's voice rang clear. I chose to accept the arrangement, to protect my family's territories from exactly the kind of violence your house later attempted. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Explain, commanded the woman. Lord Ashford gave me a choice: accept his protection or leave my people to become blood farms. For the Crimson Thorn, that's not coercion from him. That's acknowledging the reality your house created. Lord Cassius's smile thinned, yet he failed to explain the bond's true nature. He explained enough. Alara met his gaze steadily. He told me it was permanent. He told me I'd be bound to him. What he didn't explain, I've learned since, and I don't regret my choice. How convenient, Cassius sneered. Discovering you're satisfied after the fact? I discovered I was satisfied, Alara said coldly, when Lord Ashford lay burned and dying from your assassination attempt. And I chose to run into a burning building to save him. That wasn't obligation. That was choice. Silence fell across the chamber. The ancient woman leaned forward. You have proof of this attack? Lucian stepped forward, presenting the evidence they'd compiled. Documents, witness statements. The preserved samples of his burned flesh, still carrying traces of the magical accelerant used. The council examined everything with meticulous care. Finally, the ancient woman spoke. The evidence suggests House Crimson Thorn did indeed orchestrate an attack on House Nightburn grounds. This is a violation of sacred law. We acted to prevent an illegitimate bond, Cassius began. You acted out of greed. The woman's voice cut like a blade. You wanted the Thornwood territories and resented losing them to a legitimate marriage. Your challenge is denied. The bond between Lord Ashford and Lady Alara stands as legally binding. Cassius's face twisted with rage. This isn't over. Actually, Lucian said quietly, it is. The council has ruled. If you attack us again, you attack the council's authority. I don't think even House Crimson Thorn is that foolish. The ancient woman nodded. Lord Ashford speaks truth. This matter is closed. Any further aggression against House Nightburn will be met with council intervention. Lord Cassius turned and stormed from the chamber. His followers scattering like shadows. Alara's legs nearly gave out with relief. Lucian's arm wrapped around her waist, steadying her. Well done, he whispered. You were magnificent. Chapter 9. The quiet between. They returned to the manor near midnight, exhausted and triumphant. The council's ruling had been absolute. Their marriage was legitimate, the territory secured, and House Crimson Thorn publicly rebuked, but victory felt hollow as they surveyed the charred remains of the West Wing. It will take months to rebuild, Lucian said quietly, standing amid the ash and twisted metal. 3 centuries of history gone. Alara touched his arm. History isn't in the building. It's in you. The memories you carry. He looked at her, something raw and unguarded in his expression. You sound like someone who's lost things too. My father. My home, my sense of safety. She turned to face the destruction fully. My stepmother sold or destroyed everything of his after he died. His books, his papers, even his favorite chair. She said it was time to move forward, but really she just wanted to erase him. I'm sorry. Simple words, but weighted with genuine understanding. So am I, Alara drew a breath. But I'm learning that rebuilding doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing what to carry forward. Lucian's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. You're wiser than, They stood together in the ruins until the cold drove them. Inside, Mrs. Harrow had prepared a light supper in the library. The one room large enough and comfortable enough to serve as temporary living quarters. A fire crackled in the hearth, and candles softened the darkness. Alara ate while Lucian watched, nursing a glass of deep red wine that she suspected wasn't entirely wine. You need to feed properly, she observed. You've been healing for days. That glass isn't enough. I've sent for a willing donor from the village. They'll arrive tomorrow evening. He set the glass aside. I won't ask you again so soon. You gave too much last time. What if I'm offering? His eyes snapped to hers. Alara, you said the bond can be deepened. That there are rituals that would strengthen our connection. She leaned forward. Teach me. Show me what this life actually means. Why? The question came out almost desperate. Why do you want to go deeper into this world? You've fulfilled the contract. The council has ruled. You could leave now, take a portion of the estate, live your own life. Is that what you want? She interrupted. For me to leave? No, the word tore out of him. But I don't know if I'm keeping you here for the right reasons anymore. In the beginning, this was politics, protection, but now it's more, Alara finished softly. For both of us. Lucian rose and crossed to the window, his back to her. I'm 300 years old, Alara. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've forgotten more than most mortals learn in a lifetime. And yet somehow, in 3 weeks, you've become ... What? She stood and moved to him. I've become what? Essential. He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression stole her breath. You've become essential, and that terrifies me. Because I will watch you age and die while I remain frozen in time, and I don't know if I can bear it. Alara's heart ached at the grief already present in his voice. Then teach me the rituals. Let me decide if I want to walk that path. The conversion? I'm not talking about conversion. Not yet. She took his hands. You mentioned other rituals? Ways to deepen the bond without making me immortal. Start there. Let me learn your world one step at a time. He studied her face for a long moment. There's a ritual under the full moon. 3 nights from now. It requires an exchange of blood, freely given while standing in moonlight. If completed, we'd be able to sense each other's emotions at will, hear each other's thoughts if we allow it. That sounds intimate. It is. More intimate than feeding. You'd know me completely, every memory, every regret, every dark corner I've spent centuries trying to hide. His grip tightened. And I'd know you the same way. No secrets. No walls. Alara considered this. The idea should have terrified her total vulnerability before someone who could live forever, who wielded power she barely understood. Instead, she felt curious. Eager even. I want to try, she said. You don't know what you're asking. Then show me. She pulled him toward the fireplace, settling onto the sofa. Tell me your story. Help me understand what I'm choosing. Lucien sat beside her, close enough that their knees touched. For a long moment, he simply looked at the fire, gathering his thoughts. I was 26 when I died, he began quietly. A physician in London during the plague years. I stayed to help the sick when others fled, which was either brave or foolish depending on your perspective. You were always a protector, Alara observed, a ghost of a smile. Perhaps. I caught the plague from a patient. Lasted 4 days before my sire found me a vampire physician who'd been working the same district. She saw something in me worth saving, or so she claimed. You said she turned you without asking. She did. I woke up changed, furious, alone in a world where sunlight meant death and blood meant survival. His jaw tightened. The first year was hell. I nearly walked into the sun a dozen times. But gradually, I learned control. Learned the rules. And eventually, I found purpose in protecting mortals from the crueler members of my kind. Is that when you founded House Nightburn? A century later, after I'd earned enough respect and accumulated enough power. I wanted to create a house with different values, one that treated mortals as partners rather than prey. He looked at her. It's why the council listens when I speak. They may not agree with my methods, but they respect the stability I've maintained. Alara absorbed this, understanding him better with each revelation. You've been alone in that mission, haven't you? No one to truly share it with? Allies, yes. Friends, occasionally. But no partner. No one who understood why it mattered. His hand found hers. Until you walked into my hall, wrapped in grief and determination, and somehow saw past the monster to the man. You're not a monster, Lucien. I drink blood to survive. I've killed when necessary. I'll outlive everyone I care about. His voice was hollow. How is that not monstrous? Because you choose how to use your power. Because you protected territories instead of conquering them. Because when I needed saving, you gave me truth instead of pretty lies. She squeezed his hand. Monsters don't do that. He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her with careful strength. She felt his face press into her hair, felt the tremor in his shoulders. 3 nights, he whispered. Under the full moon. I'll show you everything. Alara held him close, feeling the weight of centuries in his embrace. I'll be ready, she promised. Chapter 10. Moonlight Covenant. The garden had been transformed for the ritual. Father Mikhail had spent hours arranging candles in precise patterns, drawing symbols in silver dust that gleamed under the rising moon. At the center stood a marble altar carved with ancient script, flanked by vessels of water blessed under 13 different moons. Alara wore a simple white gown, her feet bare on cool grass. Her hair hung loose down her back, and the silver circlet had been replaced with a wreath of night blooming, jasmine that Mrs. Harrow had woven with careful hands. Lucien stood across from her in dark, robes that seemed woven from shadow itself. His pale hair caught the moonlight, making him appear even more otherworldly than usual. This is your last chance to refuse, he said quietly. Once we begin, there's no turning back. The bond will be permanent. It's already permanent, Alara replied. This just makes it honest. Father Mikhail stepped forward, his amber eyes glowing in the darkness. The The Moonlight Covenant is the deepest bond two souls can share without conversion. It requires absolute trust, absolute vulnerability. Once completed, you will be two halves of one whole, distinct but eternally connected. He handed Lucian a silver knife identical to the one used in their wedding ceremony. Lord Ashford, you will offer first. Lucian drew the blade across his palm without hesitation. Dark blood welled up, nearly black in the moonlight. He held his hand over a crystal chalice on the altar, letting 3 drops fall. I offer my truth, my memories, my soul, he said, the ritual words sounding like a vow. I hide nothing. I am witnessed by moon and stars. Father Mikhail handed Alara the knife. Her hand trembled slightly as she cut her palm. The pain was sharp but brief. She held her hand over the chalice, watching her bright red blood mingle with his darker offering. I offer my truth, my memories, my soul, she repeated. I hide nothing. I am witnessed by moon and stars. The priest mixed their blood with a silver rod, chanting in that ancient language. The mixture began to glow with pale light. Drink, he commanded, and be bound. Lucian lifted the chalice to his lips first, his eyes locked on Alara's as he drank. Then he passed it to her dot. She raised it, feeling the weight of the moment, and drank. The blood was warm and tasted of copper and something indefinable, something that was purely Lucian. The moment it touched her tongue, the world exploded into sensation. Memories flooded through her, not her own, but his dot. She saw London burning with plague fires, felt the agony of transformation, bones breaking and reforming while fever consumed him. Witnessed centuries of loneliness, of watching friends age and die, of building walls around his heart to survive the endless march of time. She felt his first moment seeing her in the chapel, the shock of her beauty beneath the veil, the guilt of wanting her despite the political arrangement, the terror when he'd realized how much she already mattered. And beneath it all, she felt his love, raw and new and overwhelming, something he tried to deny but could no longer hide. The visions faded and she gasped, finding herself on her knees with Lucian holding her steady. I'm sorry, he whispered. Too much, too fast, no. She gripped his arms. Now you. See me. She opened her mind the way she'd felt him do, letting down every wall and barrier. Let him witness her father's death and her stepmother's cruelty. Let him feel the loneliness of being unwanted in her own home, the fear of being sold into marriage with a monster. Let him see the moment that fear had transformed into curiosity, then trust, then something deeper. Let him feel her love, fragile and new, but growing stronger with each passing day. Lucian made a sound like a sob, pulling her against him. Alara, God, Alara, I don't deserve. You do. She cupped his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. You deserve to be loved, to be chosen, to have someone stay. I'm terrified of losing you. I know. I felt it. She smiled through tears. But I'm here now, and I'm choosing to stay, knowing everything. The loneliness, the danger, the centuries that separate us. I'm choosing you anyway. He kissed her then, the first real kiss they'd shared. It started gentle, almost reverent, but deepened as the bond between them flared to life. She could feel his emotions tangling with hers, his desire mixing with her own until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Father Mikhail was smiling. The Moonlight Covenant is sealed. You are bound, body and soul, for as long as you both shall live. He bowed to them. May you find joy in each other through all the ages. He withdrew, leaving them alone in the garden beneath the full moon. Lucian helped Alara to her feet, his hands gentle on her waist. How do you feel? Full, she said wonderingly. Like I've been half empty my whole life and didn't know it. She touched his chest, feeling the silent heart beneath. I can sense you. Your presence, like warmth in my mind. And I feel you like sunlight, he murmured. Bright and vital and alive. They stood together in the moonlight, wrapped in each other and the new bond humming between them. What happens now? Alara asked. Now we rebuild. Lucian gestured toward the manor, where workers had already begun clearing the damaged wing. We create something new from the ashes, and we face whatever comes next together. The territories? Secure. Your stepmother will be investigated for your father's death. If she's guilty, she answer for it. His expression hardened. Justice may be slow, but it's thorough. And us? He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Us, I think we figure out as we go. You're mortal. I'm not. You love the sun. I can't touch it. But we have time to navigate those differences. How much time? Decades, at least. The bond extends your lifespan significantly. He paused. And if you ever choose conversion, I'll be there to guide you through it. But that's your decision, made when and if you're ready. Alara thought about that about centuries stretching ahead. About watching the world change while standing beside someone who understood both its beauty and its cruelty. Ask me again in 50 years, she said. Lucian laughed, the sound bright and genuine. 50 years. I can wait 50 years. He swept her into his arms, carrying her toward the manor as she laughed in surprise. What are you doing? Carrying my wife across the threshold? We never did that properly. He grinned down at her. I'm told it's traditional. You're 300 years old and suddenly care about tradition? I care about you. He kissed her forehead. And I want to do this right. They crossed into the manor together, leaving the moonlit garden behind dawn above them. The stars wheeled through the endless sky, witnessing the beginning of something rare and precious, a love that bridged the gap between mortality and eternity. Built on choice and trust and the courage to be vulnerable. In the library, Mrs. Harrow had prepared their rooms, not separate chambers anymore, but a shared suite overlooking the gardens. Lucian set Alara down gently, his hands lingering on her waist. I love you, he said simply. I should have said it sooner. I love you too. She pulled him close. Monster and all, he agreed, and kissed her beneath the light of 100 candles, while outside the moon blessed their union and the night welcomed them home.